Hi, you're listening to the Listen Up Girl podcast, your go-to source for LGBTQ plus news, real talk, and the stories that actually matter. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman, and today's episode is a big one. We're talking about quiet policy changes that could reshape trans rights across the United States, a viral confrontation in West Hollywood that's being framed into two different very ways, the politics behind major cultural events like Coachella, a major shift in education and identity laws, and so much more. Let's get into it with our first story, the long game on trans rights. We're starting with something that didn't make huge headlines, but probably should have. At an event last month hosted by America First Policy Institute, a conservative think tank closely tied to Trump allies, an official reportedly said something pretty revealing. According to reporting, attacks on trans youth are just the beginning, a prelude to overturning access to medical care for all trans people entirely. So let that sink in. This isn't just about youth health care, it's about a broader strategy. If you've been watching legislation across the country, this tracks. We've seen restrictions on gender-affirming care for minors, limits on insurance coverage, and increasing political framing of trans health care as constitutional, as controversial as or dangerous. But this is what comments suggest, is that those policies may not be the end goal. They may be just step one. And that's why conversations like this matters, because policy doesn't happen overnight, it builds. So get ready, because I think we have a big fight on our hands. Next, Rent returns with a powerful twist. So let's shift gears to something that feels honestly more hopeful, because Rent is back. And not just any production, Epic Players, a neuroinclusive theater company in New York, is staging a version of this iconic musical with an almost entirely neurodiverse and disabled cast. And if you know Rent, you know how important that is. The musical tells a story of queer love, explores poverty, art, and survival, and is rooted in the early days of the AIDS crisis. This year marks its 30th anniversary, and this production feels like a full circle moment. Because Rent was always about who gets seen, who gets heard, and whose stories matter. And this casting choice extends that even further. Representation isn't static, it evolves. And this is what this evolution looks like. Can't wait. I'm so excited. Rent was the very first Broadway show that me and my husband saw together. So there you go, a little piece of, and we've seen the original cast too, which was even more unique. Next, a West Hollywood incident, what really happened? Okay, so this one has been all over social media. And depending on where you look, you're getting two completely different versions of the story. A MAG influencer says he was attacked and punched during a confrontation with a gay couple holding their baby in West Hollywood. That's the headline. But the full story is more complicated. According to those involved, the influencer approached the couple while filming, asked questions about their child, and made comments about whether gay parents are fit to raise a baby. That's where things escalated. Tensions rose, voices raised, and eventually it turned physical. One of the men struck him, police got involved, an arrest was made, and so now we're left with two narratives. One, unprovoked attack, the other, harassment that pushed people too far. And this is where the real conversation is. Because this isn't just about one punch, it's about people coming and showing up with cameras, asking loaded, disrespectful, inflammatory questions, and pushing for a reaction. And when that reaction comes, suddenly it's framed without context. So let's be clear that violence is not the answer, but context matters. And this situation lives in that gray area where people don't like to talk about. I mean, this guy, I know who he is. He is a right-wing MAGA YouTuber, whatever guy, and he tries to provoke the LGBTQ plus people and other people just to get the reaction. So he got the reaction. You fuck around and you find out, I guess, right? Now we talk about the Coachella conversation. Let's talk about something a little unexpected about Coachella. It's been all over the internet. And God, the Madonna performance with Sabrina Carpenter was amazing. I can't stop watching it. If you haven't seen it, Madonna is number one on so many Apple iTunes charts right now across the world with her latest song. Check it out. But back to my story, because while most people are focused on outfits, music, and influencers, there's something else behind it. Coachella is owned by AEG, and AEG is controlled by billionaire Philip Anschutz. Why does that matter? Because this money has reportedly funded political donations tied to anti-LGBTQ plus causes, anti-abortion efforts, and now this doesn't mean every person attending Coachella supports that, but it does raise the question, where does your money go when you buy a ticket? For some people, that's enough to rethink attending. Not because they're missing out, because they're choosing where their dollars go. And that's a bigger conversation we're seeing more and more. Ethics and consumer choices are colliding. Next, Wyoming's quiet policy shift. The next story is one of the most concerning, and it happened quietly. Wyoming has effectively become the 9th U.S. state to block gender marker changes on driver's license. But here's how they did it. They now require an amended birth certificate to update your ID. Sounds straightforward, right? Except the state already blocked those amendments. So what you get is a de facto ban. No announcement, no major press conference, just a rule change that has massive consequences. Because without accurate ideas, voting becomes harder, travel becomes risky, employment and housing gets complicated, and people risk being outed in everyday interactions. And this is what policy look like when it's done quietly. And its impact, anything but quiet. Next, the Orange convicted felons budget and domestic terrorism. So let's talk about a new federal proposal. The Orange convicted felons 2027 budget plan includes $166 million more for terrorism efforts. But this is where it gets controversial. The proposal describes domestic terrorists as people associated with extremist migration, race, and gender, or opposition to traditional American views. That language is broad, and critics say it could be used to target activists, then advocacy for LGBTQ+, and anyone pushing social change. Because when definitions are vague, enforcement becomes subjective, and that's where concern starts. Now I'm reporting another story out of Senegal, which they're doing a crackdown. So internationally, a major development out of Senegal. After a new law increased penalties for same-sex relationships, one man has been sentenced within 10 days of arrest, facing up to 5 to 10 years in prison under the updated rules. That's fast, and it signals how aggressively the law may be enforced. While LGBTQ plus rights conversations are evolving in some parts of the world, and others, they're moving backwards, and it's moving quickly. Next, church and state, a shift in rhetoric. Back in the United States, a shift raised eyebrows this week. The chair of Trump's Religious Liberty Commission suggested that separation of church and state is a lie. And that is not subtle. It reflects a broader ideology shift towards integrating religion into policy and redefining what religious freedom means in practice. For LGBTQ plus communities, that matters because historically, religious arguments have often been used to justify discrimination, exclusion, and policy restrictions. The more stories I read about the orange convicted felon and what he's trying to do with religion and the government is so aligned to what happened in The Handmaid's Tale. It's like the woman that wrote the book, Margaret Atwood, was seeing into the future almost. It's very bizarre. Next, a teacher leaves Florida. So let's take this down to a personal level. Her last name is Stone. She's a trans high school English teacher, is leaving Florida. Why? Don't say gay laws, expanding restrictions on LGBTQ plus topics, and what she says describes as a climate of fear and silence. Over the past few years, classroom discussions have been restricted, bans have increased, pronoun rules have tightened, and for many educators, it's created an impossible environment. Stone says she's not just leaving a job, she's leaving a state that no longer feels safe to teach in. Florida is fucked. Next, Texas tech programs cut. And our final story is Texas Tech University. The chancellor has ordered a phased-out programs related to sexual orientation, gender identity, with universities now required to identify and eliminate those programs. This is part of a broader trend in higher education, rolling back diversity-focused initiatives, and it raises a big question. What happens when education stops, including certain identities? So where does this leave us? Today's stories show a pattern. Rights being challenged, narratives being shaped, and communities being forced to respond. But they also say something else. People are paying attention, and conversations like this one matter because staying informed isn't passive, it's powerful. So if you think somebody should be listening to this podcast, please share it with them. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and I'll be back tomorrow with more LGBTQ plus news.